Marginal note. Salaries of Lieutenant Governors, 60. The salaries of the Lieutenant Governors shall be fixed and provided by the Parliament of Canada. End note. 30. Marginal note. Oaths, etc., of Lieutenant Governor, 61. Every Lieutenant Governor shall, before assuming the duties of his office, make and subscribe before the Governor-General, or some person authorized by him, oaths of allegiance and office similar to those taken by the Governor-General. Marginal note. Application of provisions referring to Lieutenant Governor, 62. The provisions of this Act referring to the Lieutenant Governor extend and apply to the Lieutenant Governor, for the time being, of each province, or other the Chief Executive Officer or Administrator, for the time being carrying on the government of the province, by whatever title he is designated. Marginal note. Appointment of Executive Officers for Ontario and Quebec, 63. The Executive Council of Ontario and of Quebec shall be composed of such persons as the Lieutenant Governor from time to time thinks fit, and in the first instance of the following officers, namely, the Attorney General, the Secretary and Registrar of the province, the Treasurer of the province, the Commissioner of Crown Lands, and the Commissioner of Agriculture and Public Works, within Quebec the Speaker of the Legislative Council, and the Solicitor General. End note. 31. Marginal note. Executive Government of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, 64. The constitution of the executive authority in each of the provinces of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick shall, subject to the provisions of this Act, continue as it exists at the Union until altered under the authority of this Act. End note. 32. Marginal note. Powers to be exercised by Lieutenant Governor of Ontario or Quebec with advice or alone, 65. All powers, authorities, and functions which under any Act of the Parliament of Great Britain, or of the Parliament of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, or of the Legislature of Upper Canada, Lower Canada, or Canada, were, or are before or at the Union vested in or exercisable by the respective governors or lieutenant governors of those provinces, with the advice and consent of the respective executive councils thereof, or in conjunction with those councils, or with any number of members thereof, or by those governors or lieutenant governors individually, shall, as far as the same are capable of being exercised after the Union in relation to the government of Ontario and Quebec respectively, be vested in, and shall, or may be exercised by the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario and Quebec respectively, with the advice and consent of, or in conjunction with the respective executive councils, or any members thereof, or by the Lieutenant Governor individually, as the case requires, subject nevertheless, except with respect to such as exist under Acts of the Parliament of Great Britain, or of the Parliament of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, to be abolished or altered by the respective legislatures of Ontario and Quebec. End note. 33. Marginal note. Application of provisions referring to Lieutenant Governor and Council, 66. The provisions of this Act referring to the Lieutenant Governor and Council shall be construed as referring to the Lieutenant Governor of the province acting by and with the advice of the Executive Council thereof. Marginal note. Administration in absence, etc., of Lieutenant Governor, 67. The Governor-General and Council may from time to time appoint an administrator to execute the office and functions of Lieutenant Governor during his absence, illness, or other inability. Marginal note. Seats of provincial governments, 68. Unless and until the executive government of any province otherwise directs with respect to that province, the seats of government of the provinces shall be as follows, namely, of Ontario, the city of Toronto, of Quebec, the city of Quebec, of Nova Scotia, the city of Halifax, and of New Brunswick, the city of Fredericton. Legislative power, 1. Ontario. Marginal note. Legislature for Ontario, 69. There shall be a legislature for Ontario consisting of the Lieutenant Governor and of one House, styled the Legislative Assembly of Ontario. Marginal note. Electoral districts, 70. The Legislative Assembly of Ontario shall be composed of 82 members to be elected to represent the 82 electoral districts set forth in the first schedule to this Act. End note. 34. 2. Quebec. Marginal note. Legislature for Quebec, 71. There shall be a legislature for Quebec consisting of the Lieutenant Governor and of 2 houses, styled the Legislative Council of Quebec and the Legislative Assembly of Quebec. End note 35. Marginal note, Constitution of Legislative Council. 72. The Legislative Council of Quebec shall be composed of 24 members, to be appointed by the Lieutenant Governor, in the Queen's name, by instrument, under the Great Seal of Quebec, 1 being appointed to represent each of the 24 electoral divisions of Lower Canada, in this Act referred to, and each holding office, for the term of his life, unless the Legislature of Quebec otherwise provides under the provisions of this Act. Marginal note, Qualification of Legislative Councillors. 73. The qualifications of the Legislative Councillors of Quebec shall be the same as those of the Senators for Quebec. Marginal note, Resignation, disqualification, etc. 74. The place of a Legislative Councillor of Quebec shall become vacant in the cases, mutatis mutandis, in which the place of Senator becomes vacant. Marginal note, Vacancies. 75. When a vacancy happens in the Legislative Council of Quebec by resignation, death, or otherwise, the Lieutenant Governor, in the Queen's name, by instrument, under the Great Seal of Quebec, shall appoint a fit and qualified person to fill the vacancy. Marginal note, Questions as to vacancies, etc. 76. If any question arises respecting the qualification of a Legislative Councillor of Quebec, or a vacancy in the Legislative Council of Quebec, the same shall be heard and determined by the Legislative Council. Marginal note, Speaker of Legislative Council. 77. The Lieutenant Governor may from time to time, by instrument, under the Great Seal of Quebec, appoint a member of the Legislative Council of Quebec to be Speaker thereof, and may remove him, and appoint another in his stead. Marginal note, Quorum of Legislative Council. 78. Until the Legislature of Quebec otherwise provides the presence of at least 10 members of the Legislative Council, including the Speaker, shall be necessary to constitute a meeting for the exercise of its powers. Marginal note, Voting in Legislative Council. 79. Questions arising in the Legislative Council of Quebec shall be decided by a majority of voices, and the Speaker shall in all cases have a vote, and when the voices are equal the decision shall be deemed to be in the negative. Marginal note, Constitution of Legislative Assembly of Quebec, A.T. The Legislative Assembly of Quebec shall be composed of 65 members, to be elected to represent the 65 electoral divisions or districts of Lower Canada, in this Act referred to, subject to alteration thereof by the Legislature of Quebec, provided that it shall not be lawful to present to the Lieutenant Governor of Quebec for assent any bill for altering the limits of any of the electoral divisions or districts mentioned in the second schedule to this Act, unless the second and third readings of such bill have been passed in the Legislative Assembly with the concurrence of the majority of the members representing all those electoral divisions or districts. And the assent shall not be given to such bill unless an address has been presented by the Legislative Assembly to the Lieutenant Governor stating that it has been so passed. End note 36. 3. Ontario and Quebec, 81. Repealed. End note 37. Marginal note, Summoning of Legislative Assemblies, 82. The Lieutenant Governor of Ontario and of Quebec shall from time to time, in the Queen's name, by instrument, under the Great Seal of the province, summon and call together the Legislative Assembly of the province. Marginal note, Restriction on election of holders of offices, 83. Until the Legislature of Ontario or of Quebec otherwise provides a person accepting or holding in Ontario or in Quebec any office, commission, or employment, permanent or temporary, at the nomination of the Lieutenant Governor, to which an annual salary, or any fee, allowance, emolument, or profit, of any kind or amount whatever from the province is attached, shall not be eligible as a member of the Legislative Assembly of the respective province, nor shall he sit or vote as such, but nothing in this section shall make ineligible any person being a member of the Executive Council of the respective province or holding any of the following offices, that is to say, the offices of Attorney General, Secretary, and Registrar of the Province, Treasurer of the Province, Commissioner of Crown Lands, and Commissioner of Agriculture and Public Works, and in Quebec Solicitor General, or shall disqualify him to sit or vote in the House for which he is elected, provided he is elected while holding such office. End note 38. Marginal note: continuance of existing election laws.